Hi everyone, that night was lost. Angeles turned into a burning sea. A massive wildfire burned through the mountain district, fueled by the relentless Santa Ana winds. Thick smoke rose into the sky, covering the stars while sirens blared continuously. Detective Sarah Collins, a brave police officer, got an urgent call to help evacuate people from a very dangerous area. When she arrived, there was chaos all around. People were running in panic, holding their children and grabbing whatever belongings they could. Your senses as a professional are starting to take over. Sarah quickly took control, ordering rescue teams and helping people to safety. In the chaos, she saw an elderly woman in a hijab sitting quietly on her porch, unaffected by the flames coming closer. "Ma'am, you need to leave now," Sarah yelled to be heard over the loud winds and crackling fire, while the woman who introduced herself as Fatima just smiled softly. "I know God is protecting me," she said softly but firmly. She reached out her hand to Sarah and added, "Come sit with me for a moment." Sarah is a straightforward detective, not used to self-reflection, was surprised by Faya's calmness. "I'm sorry, we can't sit down right now," she said as she helped Foda to her feet. But before they could move, a strong wind blew, pushing the fire closer to them. Sarah had to quickly choose between crossing a narrow road surrounded by flames or finding temporary shelter while feeling a lot of pressure. Sarah felt a tight grip on her hand. "Surrender yourself," Fatima whispered as she started to say a prayer in a language Sarah didn't know. Even though she didn't understand the words, the melody was soothing. Sarah felt a sense of peace, which was odd for her in the middle of chaos. She gathered her courage. Sarah and Foda were escaping a dangerous area when suddenly an explosion from a petrol tank caused a big fire that destroyed Foda's home. To Sarah's surprise, Foda stayed calm and even smiled, as if losing her home didn't bother her. That night, Sarah saw something she couldn't understand: Foda's deep sense of peace despite the destruction. This memory stayed with Sarah even after she went back to the police station. She wondered who Foda was and why she felt so at ease during such chaos. She realized that the answers were in the prayers she had heard that night, which now replayed in her mind like a puzzling mystery after the intense wildfire. Sarah Collins couldn't forget the thought of Foda. The woman's calmness, her strong faith, and her beautiful words stayed in Sarah's mind like a song she couldn't forget. For someone like Sarah, who focused on logic and facts, this was unusual. Foda finding calm in the confusion was interesting and hard to explain. 2 weeks later, Sarah was in front of a small building in a calm part of Los Angeles with white walls. It was a plain place, and a small sign above the entrance read, "Masjid an-Nur." It wasn't grand or impressive, yet something about it attracted her. She paused for a moment, unsure if she should go inside and wondering what she was looking for. But before she could think too much, the door opened, and someone she recognized stepped out. It was Foda, whose face lit up with recognition. "Detective Collins," Foda said warmly, her voice calm as always. "I knew you would come." Sarah blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" she asked. Foda chuckled softly and shrugged. "Sometimes the heart knows things before the mind does." Sarah felt a mix of interest and awkwardness. Sarah. When Sarah entered, the inside was plain and inviting, with soft lights and a calming feel that was very different from the hectic environment she was used to. Foda guided her to a small sitting area, and they both sat down. "I need to know," Sarah started, a bit uncertain. "How could you stay so calm that night? How could you smile when everything was falling apart?" Fatima smiled at him. "I feel calm because I believe everything belongs to God, and nothing in this world is really ours. When you accept this truth, you have nothing to fear, not loss and not even death." The words resonated deeply with Sarah. They weren't just words. They offered a new way of thinking that made her question everything she believed. For hours they talked, and Fad shared the basics of her Islamic faith. She talked about submitting to God, trusting in His plan, and finding peace in knowing that there is a purpose behind every challenge. That evening, Sarah left the mosque with many questions, but also a feeling of peace that she hadn't experienced in years. In the weeks that followed, she started going back to the mosque, not as a believer, but as someone looking for solutions. She attended lectures and asked questions, asked questions, and took part in community events. Foda and others at the mosque accepted her warmly. They never pressured her, but were always happy to share their beliefs. However, outside the mosque, things were more complicated at the police station. Sarah's new interest in Islam caught the attention of her co-workers. They started talking about her behind her back, and some, like her partner Mike, openly shared their worries. One afternoon, Mike asked Sarah what was going on with her while they were in their police car. Sarah pretended not to understand and responded, "What do you mean?" Mike pointed out that she had been acting different, such as reading about Islam and visiting mosques. "Do you understand how people will view this?" Mike spoke sharply, almost like he was blaming Sarah. She turned to look at him and said, "I'm just trying to understand something, Mike. It's something I can't ignore any longer." Mike shook his head and said to be careful, because people often dislike things they don't understand, even with all the attention at work and the questions she's feeling. One evening, Sarah was exploring Islam when Fatima gave her a small Quran. "Read this," Fatima said kindly. "Don't just look at the words, feel them with your heart." That night, all alone in her flat, Sarah began to read the Quran for the first time. For the first time, the words seemed to come alive, touching her deeply. The verses about creation, justice, peace, and life's purpose affected her in a way she couldn't describe. By the time she finished the book, she was crying. Sarah fell to her knees, not in sadness, but in a strong desire to connect with something bigger than herself. Since she didn't know how to pray, she just spoke from her heart, asking for help and understanding. That night, Sarah felt that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't fully understand yet. She was at the start of a new journey. Even though it was uncertain and had many challenges, she knew she couldn't go back. After Sarah's simple prayer, her days were filled with chaos, both inside and around her. Yet she felt a deep peace that she hadn't felt in years. However, everything around her seemed to speed up. Her co-workers at the police station noticed her change in behavior and became more curious and suspicious. One morning when Sarah walked into the break room, she saw Mike by the coffee machine, looking thoughtful. "Sarah, what's really happening?" he asked. Mike asked directly, "You've been acting strange lately. People are talking about you spending a lot of time at that mosque. What's going on?" Sarah paused and gripped her coffee mug tightly. "Mike, I can't explain everything in one line, but I'm changing and learning new things that make sense to me in ways I didn't expect." Mike looked at her with a mix of worry and surprise. "So you're saying this is about Islam?" Sarah nodded, her voice soft but firm. "Yes, it's not just about religion. It's more than that. About peace. I've never felt this comfortable with myself before." Mike laughed and shook his head, saying, "I don't understand." "Sarah, I know you value logic and facts. How can this make sense to you? You're a police officer and you've seen things that could shake anyone's beliefs." Sarah spoke gently, "And maybe that's why I need this. Because the world is not right. Mike, this is the only thing that has helped me heal what is wrong inside me." Mike didn't respond. He just walked away with a tense posture. Sarah watched him leave, feeling the heaviness of his sadness. But she knew it was a burden she had to bear. Her faith was still strong. A few weeks later, after a long shift, Sarah stood in the small prayer room at the mosque. She made a decision. It was time to take the next step. Foda and the imam were waiting for her. "I'm ready," she said. Sarah asked, her voice shaking. The imam smiled gently and replied, "Are you sure? This is a big step." "I've never been more sure about anything in my life," Sarah said. They guided her through the words of the Shahada, the declaration of faith. She declared, "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." As she spoke those words, they left her lips. Sarah felt a strong wave of feeling, as if her whole being was affected. Everything in her life had led up to this moment. Each experience, each challenge, and each moment of doubt brought her to this realization. She was finally home. Fatima welcomed her with a warm hug. Tears in her eyes as a welcoming message. "Welcome to the family, Sarah." While she felt relieved about her decision, she knew challenges were ahead. The world outside might not understand her journey, including her co-workers. The next day at work, there was a tense silence. Her partner Mike didn't talk to her, and the rest of the team acted awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. It seemed that her conversion to Islam had caused an uncomfortable change. Phantom wall between her and the people she had worked with for so long, but Sarah didn't let it faze her in her heart. She knew she had made the right choice. What mattered now wasn't what others thought, but her own connection with God. That evening, she decided to do something she had been too scared to do before: pray alone in her apartment. She laid a prayer mat on the floor, took a deep breath, and turned towards Mecca. Her hands shook a little as she raised them to say, Allahu Akbar. The words felt odd to say, but they also felt important, like a key. Turning in a locked door, she went through the motions of prayer, bowing and kneeling. When she pressed her forehead to the ground for the first time, something inside her changed. Tears filled her eyes, and she finally felt a deep connection to something bigger than herself. It wasn't just the act of praying that affected her. It was the deep feeling of giving in and trusting. In that moment, Sarah understood that she had let go of the fear and uncertainty that had bothered her for so long. She had trusted God, and it felt like a relief. Sarah felt a weight lifted off her shoulders. She was no longer just a police officer or a woman looking for answers. She was a Muslim seeking her peace, one prayer at a time. Although the future held challenges, Sarah was committed to moving ahead. She understood that the journey would be tough, with questions, misunderstandings, and resistance. However, she was prepared. She aimed to use her role as a police officer to connect the Muslim community with the wider world, showing that Islam is not the enemy, but a source of peace and justice. By being true to herself, she hoped to help others find the peace she had discovered. As she went to sleep that night, she felt a quiet happiness in her heart. She had found her way, and with each step, she was getting closer to understanding her purpose, which had always seemed out of reach. Phantom wall between her and the people she had worked with for so long, but Sarah didn't let it faze her in her heart. She knew she had made the right choice. What mattered now wasn't what others thought, but her own connection with God. That evening, she decided to do something she had been too scared to do before: pray alone in her apartment. She laid a prayer mat on the floor, took a deep breath, and turned towards Mecca. Her hands shook a little as she raised them to say, Allahu Akbar. The words felt odd to say, but they also felt important, like a key. Turning in a locked door, she went through the motions of prayer, bowing and kneeling. When she pressed her forehead to the ground for the first time, something inside her changed. Tears filled her eyes, and she finally felt a deep connection to something bigger than herself. It wasn't just the act of praying that affected her. It was the deep feeling of giving in and trusting. In that moment, Sarah understood that she had let go of the fear and uncertainty that had bothered her for so long. She had trusted God, and it felt like a relief. Sarah felt a weight lifted off her shoulders. She was no longer just a police officer or a woman looking for answers. She was a Muslim seeking her peace, one prayer at a time. Although the future held challenges, Sarah was committed to moving ahead. She understood that the journey would be tough, with questions, misunderstandings, and resistance. However, she was prepared. She aimed to use her role as a police officer to connect the Muslim community with the wider world, showing that Islam is not the enemy, but a source of peace and justice. By being true to herself, she hoped to help others find the peace she had discovered. As she went to sleep that night, she felt a quiet happiness in her heart. She had found her way, and with each step, she was getting closer to understanding her purpose, which had always seemed out of reach.